Hi, I'm a developer in my 50s who's been watching the takeoff in AI development lately, and I've jumped in myself to get some experience, and I've made a few things. I thought I'd share a few of my thoughts on where this is all going. This sounds very poetic. Like my father before me, I'm a programmer. Unlike him, I didn't learn my trade in the highly difficult environment of the early 1960s mainframe, but in the ease and comfort of interpreted BASIC, various 80s home computers, and began my career in a D-Base clone called Clipper. That's my first job where I got paid money for programming. Later on, through other X-based products like FoxPro, I ended up in Visual Basic. We had built a FoxPro product, shipped very well, but had limitations, and we wanted to do something in a pure multi-document interface environment. So we moved on to Visual Basic. Our shop was migrating from a PC assembly language product, this was our main product, to rewrites. We wrote it in XBase, and then we were rewriting it in VB in the mid 90s. The older guys had written a new BIOS and a modified MS DOS to run multiple dumb terminals off a central PC, which we had some visiting IBM tech guys who told us that this was impossible, even as we were showing them this. So they really had to get down to bare metal to get the kind of performance they wanted. I began work there in 1991, again with Clipper, and I never really had to understand all that stuff. But let me tell you what I saw of what they did. In the 80s, if you were developing and you wanted to develop for business apps that were mission critical, you needed to know your octal and you needed to know your hexadecimal. You had to have your TI calculators at the ready. I remember it was like manna from heaven when Borland's Sidekick came along. And this is going to be an interesting thing. Borland's Sidekick was something that you could hit a hotkey and it would come up. It was a terminate and stay resident, because it didn't have Windows back then. It was all DOS. And it would pop up, and then you could do your calculations there for your memory locations and all that. And this was seen as an amazing thing. There was BASIC, and there was even Compiler BASIC, which we had a product that we had purchased to run things on. But to getting real performance, you always had to get closer to bare metal, and you had, frankly, treasured any abstraction away from that you could get. Then, in 1991, Microsoft released Visual Basic. PCs were getting fast enough for this. Most PCs couldn't run it yet, but they were getting there. Bill Gates showed us what the future was for at least the next 10 years, which was a world of drag and drop rather than plot, compile, groan when it wasn't in the right place and do it all over again. It was event-driven with no interrupts to worry about. Yes, like everything Microsoft did, some small shop out there did first and should get credit for it, but they're not going to, because you can't fight City Hall, and people are not going to buy systems based on small shop stuff. They're going to buy stuff that Microsoft is backing. It took a few years to get everyone on board, and D-Base and all the X-Base clones had time to survive and thrive in that environment, while the PCs in the big world were replaced with better models. And as I said before, we did a Windows system in FoxPro. It wasn't multi-document interface, it wasn't true Windows, but we did it. So that was one of our products before we went to Visual Basic. To put this all in perspective, I was in college in the early 90s. And there was I had a monochrome, no graphics PC with floppies. And that wasn't much different from what most office workers had at that time. It was going to be a while for VB and other such platforms to gain traction. I remember the only game I could play on it was a form of Tetris that used, blocks of text rather than any form of graphics. By 1995, we had a structured BASIC. The computers were there. We had a structured BASIC called Visual Basic, and with Access as our database, and then everybody migrated over to SQL Server because it was just so much better, and with remote data objects. And we started hearing, I'd say some grumbling, but some mourning. There was, by the way, enough jobs for all the programmers, and the older programmers had no problem moving into this world. So it wasn't exactly like what we're going through now with the huge job losses in programming expected. But older programmers lamented, and I think rightly, that the loss of understanding that many of the new VB bus drivers, that's me, had for the underlying reality for the machines they were programming for. Was this even programming? You were using a drag and drop interface and drawing things to generate code, behind the scenes that most of us never peeked in to look at. We were working entirely in the VB development environment. You still wrote code, so it wasn't all drag and drop, but a significant portion of it was now easy. You add in autocomplete a few years later, and you don't even need to remember your commands all that well. Development for Windows applications became easy, and you could generate working, good looking, if you had taste and style, applications quickly and robustly. And then, and this is the bell of doom, came the web, and things got hard again. You had to generate applications in a very touchy HTML environment designed to share academic papers, because that's what it was designed for by Tim Berners-Lee and all those guys. And it was never designed to do things that we wanted to do with it. Now, fortunes were made in getting the tools to do this, but developers suddenly had to take network latency, browsers, security, server traffic, and all that into account. It was a return in some sense to the pre-PC business environment of spinning tapes and dumb terminals and running everything centrally. And while drag and drop interfaces have been around since the late 90s for web development, those tools did exist. It was never easy again. They were quite touchy, early ones, and when apps were going to software as a service, and they're not coming back. The advantages for the provider of the software and the user of the software are just too great. Windows development was gone, and I followed some Reddit stuff recently about people saying, can I go back to Windows development? Is there any work in that area? And nobody could find work in that area. It's all web now. The bus drivers, like me, had to take the bus back to the junkyard. ASP.NET, which is why I picked up later, would struggle mightily to bring back those glory days. The guys at Microsoft would develop Entity and web forms, WinForms. They wanted to bring back, but it remained treacherous to step outside. Those were very tightly mapped out in the path that they had. Now Claude Code and all the other LLM coding engines are here, and we may be seeing the return of rapid application development. That's my assertion. We are seeing the return of rapid application development. I can't tell you how much easier it is to tell it what I want and to get it 95% there. I'm not advertising any of these engines, and I'm not even sure which of these companies is the next Google or just the next Alta Vista. This time in tech reminds me of that late 90s again, when we were told about all these things that we had to learn about in depth, like Gopher Space and the mechanics of Usenet servers and that stuff. And that was soon gone. And the really important stuff was just coming in. A lot of the supposedly need to know super important stuff that you'd have to learn about AI is going to be forgotten in another year or two. I think that the LLMs are going to get better, and people are saying, "Well, I'm a prompt engineer, and I know how to prompt it to get the right thing." I think it's going to adapt to the humans faster than humans are adapting to it. It's that kind of dynamic, chaotic environment. Market ruling companies today will crash out in a few years, and the ones that are going to dominate the space aren't even around yet. Remember, Google wasn't around in 2000. It was still coming up. One thing that is obvious is that we're not going back. I don't say this as a techno-optimist, and I don't say this as a person who looks down on those who think it's a bad thing, but we're not going back. These tools will allow people to generate usable applications faster and without the deep knowledge they might formerly have needed. To go back to our forebears in the 70s and 80s, they don't need octal and hexadecimal and a strong understanding of how 8080 machines deal with memory and registers, which, let's face it, just gets in the way when you're writing programs for hotel workers and line shifts, which is what we were doing. And now much of the web development is getting the same boost with the same cost. There will always be a loss of abilities, and there always has been a loss of abilities. There will always be a place for developers who truly understand it all, who are truly, bare metal guys. But they'll be where our octal warriors and our hexadecimal wizards are now, in university labs, hardware manufacturers, and in software giants. In short, this is just another layer added, or in this case, I like to assert that it's re-added. It's the return of rapid application development that we've had before. And given the increase, the speed increase in the development, and I've seen hours and days stripped off things that I know would have taken me a while to do before, It'll be a competitive necessity to use it. Never mind that all the horror stories and teething troubles that you're hearing about. Early movie CGI stunk, and it made movies that came out with it look worse than they would have otherwise. But the studios stuck with it because they knew that it would pay off in a few years, that it was cheaper by orders of magnitude than practical effects and stunts. They knew this, so they stuck with it. It will pay off in AI assisted coding as well, and the armies of programmers will be thinned out just as the armies of auto workers were over the course of the 1980s. This is not a fad. This is the return of rapid application development. Thank you for watching.